something that I operate with in a big way is uncertainty and being able to operate where we don't know what's going to happen next and we're making decisions about things as they come to us. I didn't necessarily define the whole pathway here years ago and say, we're going to go do that. It was take one step at a time and keep building on that and watch the market move, watch how consumers are behaving, watch how regulators are taking stances and adapt to the environment, which is what I think most cannabis companies have had to do in many ways, right? Especially going back to the earlier years of the rec market. So I think embracing that uncertainty can be really important for companies to do and figuring out how you, again, fit in the market today and survive while thinking about where you need to be in 5 and 10 years and having a vision for what things will look like when they become mature and the stigma doesn't exist anymore. Right.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 140 of High Spirits. I'm Ben Larson.
And I'm Anna-Ray Grabstein.
And we're recording June 2nd, 2026. And we have a great show for you today. We have Alay Lindquist from FloraWorks coming on to talk about CBN, true CBN, and all things minor cannabinoids, hemp, and the regulated channels. Lots to talk about there. But before we do, Anna-Ray, happy summer. Is it summer? I don't know. My kids are in summer, and it's driving me nuts already, but
it's foggy.
I don't feel like it's summer yet.
I know. I talked to a friend in Denver this morning, and she was texting me pictures of snow outside her window. So I think it is. We're moving quickly towards summer, but I'm not sure that the weather's caught up.
I don't know.
I am
it was pretty hot here yesterday.
Yeah. I just did something that I've never done before, which is I booked a train ticket to go from the West Coast to Chicago to get myself to the Ignite It conference in a week and a half. So
Old
I'm
school.
pretty excited. I know. I was
How long does it take to train ride from California to Chicago?
It's going to take me 52 hours, and I'll leave on a Friday afternoon and get there on a Sunday afternoon. And yeah, I was complaining to my husband about how there's no dignity left in plane travel anymore. And he flippantly told me that I should just try taking the train. And I thought he was crazy and told him so. And then that night I was just scrolling on my phone and I realized that you can actually take one train from the West Coast all the way to Chicago. It is called the Zephyr train. It's Amtrak. And I booked myself a sleeper car and I'm hoping it is dignified. It's instead of plane travel. And I've got a private car all to myself. It comes with food and a bathroom and who knows? Yeah. You ever traveled by train?
I just want to point out that is a crazy series of events that has you taking a train from California to Chicago for a cannabis conference. I just want to point out, whatever your husband's thinking, I stand with him. But I hope it's a great time. I guess there's no security, so you could bring whatever consumables you want on the train and enjoy your 52 hours.
Exactly. I get to look out the window through the Rocky Mountains and the Sierras. I think it's going to be beautiful, and if it's not, then I will nap.
I think it will be beautiful. That's just not efficient travel. But why the hate for air travel? Is it just? I mean, was it dignified? I just never that descriptor just never came to mind for me.
I don't think our listeners need us to understand why plane travel is undignified. Everyone knows. It's terrible.
Okay.
And I still will be flying home, but
we need to get you status on some airline or something.
What's going on with you? You doing any kind of wild travel coming up?
No, anti-travel lately, with the exception of Oklahoma City, which I've actually never been to, but OKC, who actually I think they just got beat by San Antonio, so womp womp. But going out to Oklahoma City for the CANRA conference, this external stakeholder event. So once a year, get to commune with all the stakeholders, all all the regulators from all across the U.S. and beyond. So it'll be a good year for it, I guess. There's so much happening, which we'll talk about a lot in the show today. So looking forward to that. But other than that, baby watch. I mean, we're in the last month, end of this month. I'll be locked down. Maybe doing
Yeah.
a podcast or two, but yeah, not
It's
too
a
much
big
more.
deal. Well, and the Canberra conference, you make it sound not like that big of a deal, but it is pretty fancy invite only. They only let certain stakeholders in the room. So it's good that you're there and that you're getting those invitations.
Yeah. Well, we've had Jillian on the show. That may or may not have been a hack, but also, when you're representing, an organization as a board member or something like that. So NCIA will be there, CABA will be there, and then I kind of pretend to do both. So
I'm not sure it's pretending. I know you show up with those things. Well, let's jump into some news and then bring our guest on. The first news that I wanted to highlight today is all about reverse stock splits. And we heard last week that Curaleaf had announced a reverse stock split of 3-1. But then this week woke up some more news of Verano and Vireo doing similar actions. The Verano stock split is closer in kind of form and function to what Curaleaf did. Curaleaf's was 1 for 3, and Verano is going to be 1 for 5. But Vireo, and they're not even calling it a reverse stock split, they're calling it a consolidation of shares, has a the board to make a decision of a consolidation of somewhere between 20 and 40 shares to 1. And it's an assumption that it's going to land at 30 shares to 1. And everybody says that this is in preparation for uplisting and general financial hygiene. As a quick primer, NASDAQ stocks must trade above $1 to be in compliance with the market. But for me, I look at these stocks that have really just been on this downward trajectory for a very long time. And I wonder if this is just inflating the value higher to give more room for the stocks to drop. The trajectory has not been great. What do you think, Ben?
Uh, yes, you're right. And I'm not loving the fact that we're entering like this phase again for the cannabis industry of potentially just seeing press releases to announce like big nothing burgers. Also, major cannabis companies, banking on future action or future opportunity, where most operators in the space have known just to play the game as it lies today, and then if changes come, then act on them. And so all this predictive movement, I don't know. It's gonna. I would say that it's just gonna create froth, but I think the retail buyer knows to not act until something actually happens. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, we continue along playing the game of threes. We had 3 stock reverse splits, and now we also have 3 House Republicans that are attempting to thwart the intoxicating hemp product ban that's coming in November. 3 separate bills, 3 separate representatives, 3 separate angles. The angles are basically delay, regulate, or unfund. And the representatives are Barr, Russell, and Comer, all from the southern states of Kentucky, South Carolina, and Kentucky in that order. So really interesting to see that there's all these different perspectives coming to the table as it relates to what is right now currently scheduled to happen in November. And what I can tell you for sure is that they can't all 3 move forward because they would almost like defund each other. But maybe one or both or a combination of some will get swallowed up into some other bill or pushed forward before November, which is certainly what the hemp industry is hoping for.
Yeah, no, I think this is great public signaling, especially if you think about progress since last year, where basically it was Rand Paul and Senator Ted Cruz standing up and supporting the category. There was other positive votes, but for the most part on the Republican side, that's what we had. And now we have 3 new Congress people, throwing their hat in the ring, and 2 from Kentucky, which famously is where Mitch McConnell's from. Andy Barr recently getting, Trump's endorsement and showing some momentum there, and then, very publicly announcing that he's been working with the White House, working with Congress to put together language that is passable. And so all these things put together, it feels like momentum is building, and that this is just large signaling that Congress has to get something done to support this category, to support what the president stated in his executive order. So which one goes through, how it goes through, maybe it's none of these, right? And what it does do is call people to the table to make sure that we do have a consolidation of effort and choose the right vehicle and the right path forward.
Yeah, I've been following the prediction markets a bunch and trying to see what the broad public thinks about things to predict.
Prediction markets
And
like Polymarket, or what's the
yeah, like Kalshi
okay.
is the one that I looked at. And surprisingly, I didn't see anything on there about anybody placing bets about if hemp products will continue on past November or not. People are placing bets on all kinds of other things.
Well, I think that just
Not
shows like how we have successfully penetrated the political layer, but still, like, the general public probably doesn't recognize that there's one of two things, right? They don't recognize that THC products are kind of in the open marketplace, around the country, or two, they don't realize that they're going away. And so that's why you've seen folks like WSWA create their campaign to make it really easy for people to message their Congress people. But not just that, they're also trying to inform the general public that these products are at threat of going away in November. So if you don't want that to happen, submit a letter. So I think the program's called Save Hemp Beverage as far as the WSWA one goes. I know Diana Eberline just posted something on LinkedIn today. It's her birthday. Happy birthday, Diana. But for her birthday, go to this post, click through, and send a letter to Congress.
Sounds amazing. Yes, and happy birthday, Diana. Let's move on to bringing our guest on. Our guest today is Ale Lindquist. He's the founder and CEO of FloraWorks, a company with roots as a wholesale minor cannabinoid supplier to major brands like Wild and Heirloom, and now has developed a consumer product called True CBN, a proprietary form of CBN that is backed by peer-reviewed, placebo-controlled sleep study. The company recently announced that True CBN is implementation ready for the CMS Substance Access BEI program, which is a mouthful, with a 1,020 person clinical trial and documentation built for all the scrutiny. So we are excited to welcome Ale onto High Spirits today and talk about all things minor cannabinoids. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Hey, great to see you. Long time, like, just quick shout out. You guys have been a long time partner, supplier to us at Vertosa. From very early on, it just was clear that you wanted to do things right, that the process that you're doing, the purity that you're doing, we really appreciated that. And even the sample kits you would send us, you inspired us to do better sample kits at one point. So yeah, just appreciate how you've been kind of leveling up the ingredient layer for many years now. How long has it been?
We're a 6-year-old company now since we first started producing CBN back in the day. And we were the first company to actually manufacture it at any type of scale, and brought it in through a couple of our local Oregon companies, Gruen and Wild, back in the day. And those products took off and became major winners. And now I think pretty much every edible company in the country has a CBN product, CBN SKU, as well as now, multiple minor infused kind of, I guess I'll refer to them as effect-based formulations, specific effect-based formulations that people are working on. And so it's been nice to see just the evolution of the products in the industry, and particularly kind of consumer behavior and how they're adopting and prefer this route. So it's been a journey trying to go through all the different hoops and changes and things, but we've got lots to do ahead of us, and we're excited about kind of how things are unfolding, the regulatory landscape, the interest in cannabinoids as therapeutics in medicine, and what we think that will kind of bring about from new research and new consumer trust and confidence that comes from that. So, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Before we get into all of the new developments around medicine, I do want to dive a little bit deeper into the ingredient supply chain. And I think that a lot of consumers and even a lot of operators don't realize that CBN and THCV and CBG don't necessarily come from the same indoor cultivation in regulated cannabis that that same jar of flour might, that they're buying at a dispensary, and that there is a whole nother realm of cannabinoid manufacturing outside the regulated supply chain for minor cannabinoids. And I'd love for you to enlighten our audience about what that looks like and what you've built at FloraWorks in terms of that supply chain.
Yeah, so we've kind of transitioned over the years. We are not a cannabinoid manufacturer anymore. We are a process licensee. We do contract manufacturing basically for CBN now, which we have a patented process that we think is really unique and scalable. We've standardized that so we could approach, FDA pathways like dietary ingredients and a future drug pathway as well. But in the current markets, the big issue that we really saw is just the fragmentation of the supply chains, and kind of just filled the need there to make sure that product was QC'd correctly, that it was flowing smoothly to the clients when they needed it, not from like a batch to batch. Hey, I've got some CBN today and I'm going to sell it and I'm going to have to make another batch. So we've really been a logistics and supply chain company for a little while here. CBN is more of a recent change. We have been manufacturing that for many years, but are just kind of transitioning now to setting up multiple contract manufacturers under our proprietary process. But yeah, it's really just been making sure that companies have, the quality and the consistency that they need to build their products and not have to worry about, where it's going to come from next. And it's been a shaky road. We've had to juggle those supply chains pretty aggressively and invest in, large scale purchases of inventory to make sure it was always going to be available. So it's been an interesting dynamic to kind of do that as a requirement almost as a company, where our core focus has been clinical research and really where is this going to go from a regulatory landscape down the road, and kind of living in two worlds essentially is where do we think it's going to be in 5 and 10 years, and what do we have to do today to satisfy where the market exists and how to survive as a company. So it's been interesting there, but yeah, excited to see it coming together, and I think there's going to be more to come for these miners, certainly.
So the topic about like where it comes from and all that kind of stuff, I've been thinking a lot about it lately, and I've been acutely aware of where CBN comes from, where THCV comes from, and a whole host of other minor cannabinoids. At the same time, been involved in a lot of conversations at the federal level, and it's been difficult to create a nuanced conversation around like what's synthetic, semi-synthetic, which is a whole umbrella of different things. And I'm curious from your lens, because I'm sure you have a lot invested in this, how are people parsing between semi-synthetic intoxicants versus the minor cannabinoids that both the regulated and hemp supply chains rely on?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a complicated conversation with regulators. Oregon was the first state to essentially create rules around what they referred to as artificially derived, and how they define that. And so we were front lines, years ago in negotiating what was in general an attempt to stop converting CBD into THCs, and basically allow, trying to curb that and getting washed up in it, I guess, or pulled into that conversation. Oregon was unique, where they ended up creating kind of a approval pathway for a cannabinoid that is process agnostic, but safety forward. And so GRAS and NDI requirements for so that you could make what they would refer to as an artificially derived cannabinoid under their definition, which I really don't like that word, but they did allow for safety work to be done to get that approved into the market here. We kind of had two paths because we've worked on a lot of chemistry. Not all cannabinoids are enzymatic, as you'd call them. So the plant doesn't produce the particular, doesn't produce CBN. CBN's an oxidative derivative. So many of the cannabinoids, they kind of go through this chain of morphine in the plant. And then when the plant is harvested, some of those cannabinoids will then start to break down into other cannabinoids. So you have this huge family of molecules that are potentially therapeutic in our view, each one uniquely kind of mechanistically different. Not all of them, but some of them are uniquely different and kind of stand alone in their own place. And so I think that conversation is definitely complicated. We're having it across multiple states right now, trying to navigate how they've decided to put language together here. At the federal level in the fall here, the language is they have, 3 different categories the FDA was supposed to have created. They missed their deadline and it didn't happen. Waiting to see what comes of that. But there was going to be a list of natural cannabinoids made by the plant that are not intoxicating. There was going to be a list of natural cannabinoids that are intoxicating and not allowed. And then there was going to be a list of synthetic THCs and intoxicants that were not allowed. The definition they put around that was manufactured outside the plant. They failed to define that also. Makes this a really complicated situation. But yeah, for us, it's, trying to do more efficacy and safety work and use that as the core piece of the conversation, because in our view, the intent of any regulator, and given, different regulators, different views, is not to restrict access to a compound that has a therapeutic or a beneficial value that is safe. It's to, stop compounds that have never been consumed by humans before, and kind of the Pandora box of chemistry that comes with kind of adding this new layer to the industry. As a company, we're agnostic to manufacturing pathway. It's really about what is the most economical pathway to produce a clean molecule. And so, that would be consistent with every other category of things that we consume, where, caffeine and energy drinks is made synthetically. Acetaminophen is made as a synthetic molecule. So it's all over the place. And in cannabis, it's kind of a complicated conversation.
I hear that what you're talking about is really these nuances around manufacturing, and I think it's really important for people to understand. And at the same time, I think that there is some fear around what happens to access to minor cannabinoids broadly after the hemp ban, and if the existing miners that people depend on using today's manufacturing work streams are still going to be available. In particular, like I looked at some BDSA data before we got on this recording today, and in every single state that I looked at, when I looked at top edibles in the market, at least one of the top 10, if not 6 out of the top 10 had CBN in them. And so that's a massive amount of consumer adoption of products with CBN in particular, but there's certainly other popular minors as well, CBG and THCV. Is there a risk that those minors won't be available after the hemp ban goes into place in November?
I mean, I think there's always a risk with regulators, because I've certainly gotten wrapped up in what feels like more of an argumentative kind of engagement where it's not friendly in many cases, and they're not there to work with you to create, good legislation. They end up kind of taking a really adversarial approach. So it certainly can happen. My view is the FDA is more friendly than they've ever been when it comes to cannabinoids today, whether they like the current landscape of how they've kind of moved into the markets and into consumers' products without any oversight, I think is still, their biggest concern here. But as it comes now, some of them won't be affected at all in theory. This 90-day list that never came out, certainly I haven't been able to get an answer from the FDA on that. And I've given them quite a bit of documentation to support a full range of minor cannabinoids that should be accepted and are exist in literature and are present in the plant in biomass and naturally, compounds. But, CBG is an enzymatic. The plant has been bred to produce that. Some of the others like CBC and THCV are much more difficult to get from the plant. There are genetics that are being worked up for those. They're just not viable yet for producing scale. CBN is an oxidative compound, is basically always a process to make it because it's a process that it forms naturally anyway in the environment. It's oxygen as a chemical in this case under the real conversations around chemistry. Degrades cannabinoids and CBN is kind of a core degradation molecule. It kind of lands there and is stable. And so to be determined, but I feel pretty confident that we're going to cruise through this, even if no legislation of these three bills you've talked about end up passing before that. I think the FDA has a very complicated argument around this manufactured outside the plant, which give them leeway to be aggressive or not aggressive in this. And from a legal perspective, you would say, well, everything's manufactured outside the plant the moment you harvest it and start extracting it. And so they didn't define that. It's going to be complicated, but I think and even if they were, in the case of CBN, to say this is not hemp, it kind of just puts CBN into a normal molecule category where it's not scheduled by the FDA. It would just be like any new plant molecule that doesn't have a GRAS or a dietary standing yet, and would go towards that path. I mean, that's what we have tracked for many years here of different new molecules that have come to market. And, I would argue the FDA has always had a regulatory path for products. It was more that I think the biggest issue is CBD has a complicated drug preclusion provision in the drug language because it was not already a food ingredient or a dietary ingredient prior to the Farm Bill. And Epidiolex was approved prior to that. Basically, the FDA has this little rule written in that says a drug can no longer become a dietary ingredient or a food ingredient if it didn't have those prior to becoming a drug. And so it has this complicated regulatory thing that's hung it up in this weird quasi gray zone for all these years, where the rest of these minors don't have that. And so conceptually, what we've been working on all these years is that this would be the normal pathway of any molecule that is presumed to be safe, could walk down these pathways and get approval either externally as a self-affirmed GRAS by a third-party panel as safe, or through a dietary ingredient filing. And that would open up, significant market access, essentially, that has been uninterested in touching cannabinoids under the lack of clarity today. So to be determined when we get into the FDA of really how they felt about this the whole time.
So, I mean, you're pretty early on all this and been investing a lot into it over the last 6 years. And we'll talk about just how much with, the launch of True CBN and all the clinical work going into that. But what was it about CBN in the very early days that made you be like, yep, this is the one, and we're gonna throw was that how it went? It's like 6 years from now we're gonna be talking to the FDA and we'll be on the verge of creating supplements and medicine and all that kind of stuff because it's not CBD or THC.
Yeah, no, there's a little bit of stumbling forward in this one. What is, and I actually was not the founder of FloraWorks. The company was created. There was a chemist that believed that CBN was an interesting molecule and wanted to work on manufacturing that. And I kind of came in as an advisor to help them. And, company moved forward for almost 2 years. And then the investors that had stepped in when I had stepped in to fund that asked me to take over. So that was the point in which it was kind of a pivotal moment of, well, what are we really doing here? How does the supply chains look for this? The market for CBN is still arguably not that big.
Mm-hmm.
There's more productive capacity today than there is consumption for CBN. It's still relatively nascent. Fits into the edible market really well, but
Probably because most people aren't doing effective doses.
yeah, no, I mean, there's plenty to come, I think, in terms of what doses is really effective for products. I think that's going to translate across all minor cannabinoid. I don't like the word minor cannabinoid, I suppose, but just cannabinoids in general. And so, it was basically just taking a look when I kind of stepped in as a CEO role to say, well, what do these other markets look like, and why are cannabinoids not being accepted into mainstream channels for wellness and well-being, or drugs? At that time, Epidiolex, there was a clear path. It's like, in theory, you could go down the path of proving a cannabinoid effective. The cost is extreme, and Epidiolex was a very long, slow, and expensive road to get that approved. But they paved the path in theory and showed that there was at least some level of friendliness of the FDA to approve a cannabinoid. And so it was just trying to say, what can we do to, again, improve consumer interest and trust in these products? Stigma is always a hard thing in this industry. And surprisingly enough, as someone who's been in this industry all these years, there's still quite a bit out there, of stigma that we face, for these compounds. So, doing anything we could to get rid of that stigma or kind of soften it so that people could see that these things are safe and that they are effective, and proving where they were. And so it was kind of luck. Back to your question, that CBN was the molecule, and in my view now, CBN, I think, is going to be one of the most important cannabinoids in the family of cannabinoids out there when it comes to therapeutics and wellness. It's got unique polypharmacology to it that we've kind of discovered through a handful of different research initiatives. Sleep is great, and that's unique, and it stands out amongst cannabinoids as a sleep molecule. And has, unique mechanisms that we believe are part of its sleep effect there, that don't show up in other places. And some of the research that we've seen that was not done by us, but we've just written a paper that we're putting in for peer review right now, basically looking at the totality of sleep research around CBN over the years, and kind of synthesizing that into a current state of the science. And, things like THC can have perceived improvement with sleep, but generally will show REM sleep or architecture decline in sleep. And studies that have looked at CBD with CBN generally have shown that CBD will inhibit the sleep effect of CBN, or diminish it. And that CBD by itself is kind of hit or miss, and it's not a heavily supported sleep aid. And so we really look at the market for sleep as a huge and growing issue, or that sleep is a big issue and there's a big market for it. And that the only option out there today that's really is melatonin. And it's got more and more kind of negative side effects. It's a hormone, which is, always something new to consider when you start playing with your hormones in your body, and can kind of maybe great for circadian rhythm management, during, long distance travel. But outside of that, has shown some real issues for people that have taken it consistently for long periods of time and struggle to stay off of it and struggle to kind of rebalance their own natural sleep cycles. So, as the mission becomes in health, how do I not only get to sleep and stay asleep, but how do I actually have quality sleep? It's what molecules out there can contribute to improved sleep architecture and improved recovery. And CBN looks like it does this and does it well compared to the landscape out there for sleep. So,
Mm.
this is, in my view, the narratives that are really going to bring cannabinoids into the mainstream and make them part of, everybody's medicine cabinet down the road, the way all these other compounds and things are, all over the place. So, I think we're really in a great time right now. And it's been a tough 5 years, I think, or 6 years in this industry. Whereas like the big rec boom exploded and came, and then it was not as lucrative for the investors, and that set a big negative tone, and it kind of got overlooked. The therapeutic and research side of it kind of died out for a number of years here,
Mhm.
at least from a company perspective, but sorry, I'm talking for a long time.
That's cool. Well, so, you're talking about the medicine cabinet and, you're not abandoning your ingredient business, but you're certainly expanding to the medicine cabinet. As opposed to bulk ingredients, you've made a decision to go all in and focus on True CBN, which is the name of a product that you've rolled out that's focused on CBN. It's meant for individuals. It is a oil-based capsule, from what I can tell from reviewing the information that's out there. Uh, talk about this decision to build a consumer healthcare product on top of an ingredient foundation.
Yeah, so actually, True CBN is an ingredient, and so we researched it as a pure molecule, as an ingredient. So all of our work was about creating uh, a more substantiated ingredient and being able to bring that to our clients as a uh, better, not better CBN. CBN is kind of CBN, if it's of pure quality, but putting the regulatory and efficacy work behind it so that they could open up new markets. So the consumer product side is a relatively smaller thing within the company. Our focus is still ingredients, but we had to create the product to run that clinical trial. So we had a way to ingest it. And so we carried that over, and currently it's actually primarily a real world evidence platform for us. And
Hmm.
so we have a real world evidence uh, platform set up. We are recruiting into that basically as many people as we can. The primary goal was to capture more objective data from wearables. And so if you have an Oura Ring or, Fitbit or one of these devices, you'd be able to sync it up. Yep. With the app that has all of the tracking in it. So today it's still a research project more than anything. We don't really go out and push that product as a consumer product today. Um, when it comes to like this new BEI program that Medicare, we're kind of looking at both sides. We want this ingredient out there. We want companies to have access to this program with a substantiated ingredient. So that's our core focus. If our product ends up making it in, that would be great. But we really see this as um, just substantiating CBN as a whole. We're not looking to be an independent CBN company. We want CBN to be a major ingredient, and we're trying to build the foundation for that ingredient to be out there. Examples would be KSM 66, which is an ashwagandha company. And it's like, there's ashwagandha that is not KSM 66, but it's very little. And it comes from lesser supported suppliers. And so we really took that as the model And there's other dietary ingredients, specialty dietary ingredients. So we basically said that's the model for cannabinoids.
Mm.
Is let's substantiate these things, let's make them, give them all of the framework to access markets and get approvals and build consumer trust. So, uh, you know, consumer side is great. It gives us this access to people and understanding how they're using it and what the feedback is, and gather more data. But the real push is just to make true CBN as common as acetaminophen or melatonin.
All right, so I'm having a little science envy here. So it's like selfishly, I want to dig into the nuts and bolts around kind of proving true CBN. And so you guys ran this 1,000+ person randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial, which sounds very pharmaceutical grade. You've talked about toxicology. Can we just like get real about like the time, the expense, like how much that takes to support to get products through that process? Because I think that's top of people's mind right now as we think about the CMS program, as we think about kind of entering this new phase of cannabis's Schedule 3. And we've all heard, and I think it scared a lot of people off of investing into it in the past, about like
Yeah.
how poor of an investment it was, but you guys got there or getting there. So yeah, I would just love to hear more about it.
Yeah, I think there was short-term investment interest in this sector,
Mm,
and this is not short-term investment type of return categories, right? It takes years. So, uh, when we first started selling CBN, and we did believe there was the old anecdote that old cannabis made you sleepy because the THC had degraded to some CBN, and so that there was like this old myth, I guess, that drove that sleep narrative. But once that was out there and people were consuming it and they were returning for those products, and it was going really well, that's where the sleep study came in. Is that, can we validate this anecdote in a way that proves that it's real? It's not just people talking. It's not an anecdote anymore. And so we ran that study. It's a subjective study, and so it's not like a in lab objective data collection study, but it's a
mm,
statistically large study. We use Radical Science, which
mhm.
is what they do. They build these studies. They register them for IRB and oversee them. So that gave us what we call structure function claims in the eyes of the FDA, and we've notified them of this, and send the letter in, basically. But things like clinically proven to improve sleep quality, we're putting sleep on the front of the box. Those type of statements all require substantiation behind them. And so this was our first study to kind of build that foundational piece there, which is a big when it comes to consumers, as well as not getting sued and not having the FTC come after you, which does happen in this industry occasionally. And I think we're going to see a lot more of it. We've got
So
that.
does this get you there? Can you put sleep on the front of the pack as a result of this study and not get sued?
Yeah. So
Theoretic-
yeah, we have now the substantiation on the ingredient itself, that when used at the dosage in the study, you could say clinically validated to improve sleep quality. You could say improve sleep quality. You could put sleep on the front of the box. There's a handful of different ways you could kind of twist that statement up that would still be valid. What we couldn't say is you treat insomnia with this. It
Mm,
goes from what you call a structure function claim to a disease claim, and that does
mhm.
require a full drug process approval. So and we want CBN to live in the dietary space. We don't want this issue where CBD is available, but it's not recognized as a dietary ingredient or a food ingredient. And essentially all of it is being sold illegally under that rule. Um, and so we want to make sure that CBN is available. That makes the price point of it much cheaper than going down the drug path. So, and it's safe, too. So it's not something that really needs to go down that route in our view. We have other indications that we would pursue with CDN particularly, but sleep would probably not be one of them unless it was something unique, like treating sleep disruption in alcohol use disorder recovery.
Mm.
where
Mm.
you're picking something kind of narrow that and studying that very specifically. Those could be drug claims, but in the general sense of it, just want it to be a sleep aid out there with melatonin.
But
Uh,
what is the effective dose, or what the range that
yeah, so
you
we
validated?
ran. It was actually also the largest study on melatonin in history. Was our study.
Oh,
So we ran a blind, gel cap with nothing. We ran 25, 50, and 100 milligrams of CBN, and then we ran a dose of melatonin as well. And 25 had improvement in sleep, but it didn't quite hit what we consider a statistical improvement in sleep. 50 milligrams was a statistical improvement in sleep quality. And then the 100 milligrams, we saw no improvement essentially from 50 milligrams, which is
hmm.
an interesting kind of, release. It was interesting to us. It was interesting to the researchers. There was no benefit to just taking more, essentially,
Yeah.
is you kind of saturated the receptors that are potentially, at play here, and there was no need for any extra CBN. And then we also, that 50 milligram outperformed melatonin in the study. And so
Wow.
that was, kind of phase one for us. It gave us the structure function claims. It proved that the anecdote was real. Since then, we've run, and just research generally, what are the mechanisms at play here? And the big one here, and much more expensive than that study, which was somewhere around 200K to do that,
Mm.
is the toxicology work. And so, you start with what is called a gap analysis, and basically assess the current state of the research, particularly around safety and, current consumption, and determine what studies and what's missing from that to basically go in for this dietary ingredient or food standard. And so that's where we've run motor battery function to prove that, CBN is not impairing or intoxicating. We're actually going back to do more work on that just because they're telling us we have to. This is where the
Hmm.
stigma around cannabinoids comes in, where it's like, well, we need to prove this thing is not impairing, um,
Yeah.
you know, first, and then, all of the toxicology in rats, basically, proving that up to 400 milligrams a kilogram is still not toxic, basically. And so that gives you this huge, essentially you're trying to prove that even at huge consumption, the molecule is still safe. And then that gives you like a factor of safety. And so that was the bigger work. And we spent about $1 million just on those studies over the course of the 3 years here.
Wow.
Um, our big one, 90-day oral tox, is going into peer review. It's in peer review now,
Mm.
to be published. And so,
I just
uh,
want to point out that 50 milligrams sounds like a pretty heroic dose compared to what most people are consuming. I've seen products that have 2 milligrams of CBN. And so it's like, if 50 is the equivalent of melatonin, then I don't know what that makes too. But um,
yeah,
the whole like intoxicating conversation is interesting because I do find that CBN acts a little bit different than a typical sleep product that does at high doses tend to make you feel like kind of loopy and groggy. Where I don't know if I've ever felt that with CBN. I also can't remember if I've had a 50 milligram dose or not. But like, do you have specific findings around how it makes you feel versus its actual effectiveness when you're sleeping?
there's anecdote of taking CBN, of people saying, I feel more relaxed.
Mm.
There was in our sleep study, there was some stress measurements as well. And there was some, reduced stress
Hmm.
effect in there that, probably contributes to that perception that, people are feeling there. Haven't really had, kind of impairing or intoxicating responses, even up to very high doses that people have taken. Again, this is anecdote, because looking at, there was actually an insomnia trial on CBN now in Australia where they dosed at 300 milligrams, and they also did not report any intoxication there. But, the products that exist today, most of them have THC, which
Mm-hmm.
is, a different thing when you add that. And so I can't say today that 10 milligrams of THC and 2 milligrams of CBN isn't effective at improving sleep quality. Again, the research around THC generally shows degraded architecture,
Hmm.
and insomnia rebound is kind of the historical narrative there, when you try to stop taking it. And so, whether it's, I think that's to be determined. We did a real world evidence study on a 1-to-1 recently. So 10 milligrams, which is the most common product, and it reported very well,
Hmm.
in terms of perceived sleep improvement, who is well-being effect. Basically, it's a measurement of well-being, and there was a significant improvement in well-being at that dosage, 10 and 10. So that was the first time we had validated or kind of ran anything that we see in the rec markets today, equivalent
Hmm.
to that's the most common rec formulation with CBN out there. Um, but we have a 50 milligram insomnia trial running right now, or not we do, but we've collaborated with Drexel University, and they are running a 7-day insomnia trial with 50 milligrams of CBN. And so that'll be really interesting to see the results of here. It'll probably take another 9 months before we see
Hmm.
those. Um, and we're just getting deeper in the mechanisms that these are working on. And I think that's where I'm most excited for the evolution here is what are these molecules doing at
Hmm.
the mechanistic level? They're doing uh, they're polypharmacological, so they're hitting multiple receptors, but they're also operating outside of receptor activity. And so we've had a really cool collaboration with the Salk Institute, and they've got a Alzheimer's research division where they've been looking at a neuronal cell death pathway they call oxytocin ferroptosis, that they believe is essentially the path that cells die in neurodegenerative diseases, and have been looking for compounds that inhibit this pathway. And CBN turns out to be a compound that does a very good job at inhibiting the cell death pathway.
Huh.
And we actually looked at 40 different cannabinoids. So we gave a big family, tried to look at the structure activity differences between all of these. And CBN is an outlier for this, which is why we're very excited about the future here.
Hmm.
And we moved that from petri dish studies looking at the mechanism into a mouse study, and essentially reversed age-related cognitive decline in these mice that have dementia in a meaningful amount. This was published just last year, um, but the yeah, I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but
Well, so Ale, you're talking about doing clinical trials, going through the GRAS process at a time when most of the cannabinoid industry broadly has not been doing anything like that. And the level of science that you're bringing to this conversation is definitely unique compared to a lot of other CEOs that we talk to. I'm just wondering, over the course of the past couple years, are there moments when you've questioned that focus, when it seemed like consumers, investors, kind of the market generally was not supporting this hypothesis, and how you got through that?
I don't know if I ever questioned the thesis of doing it versus questioning whether we were going to be able to do it. And I think I still question, how far are we going to be able to go here? Um, like I said, we basically became a supply chain fulfillment company along in parallel, which is beneficial because it puts us kind of in the middle of all these compounds and close to them, and dealing with the manufacturers, and how do we add value to these things beyond just manufacturing them, right? That's where we see FloraWorks' kind of ultimate goal here is defining the use cases for these and validating those use cases. So yeah, it was certainly tough along the way, and part of me was pretty surprised we made it as a company today, and we're grateful for all of the customers that we have. That's I'm sure it helped us doing the research kind of stand out as a supplier out there, that we want to elevate the industry, and we want this to elevate our customers' products, and really kind of um, see, again, a new renaissance and a new, we're seeing it with the medical and new markets opening up in Germany and things and all these conversations around medical cannabis. And um, this is what is going to do that and build that and get regulators, get doctors, clinicians on board, and get, broader consumer interest to come is the research. And there's actually been a lot coming out over the last few years. We're working on a big paper and looking, and there is so much more coming out of institutions in the last 3 to 4 years that's really exciting to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have arrived here and you are in this moment. And I you were an advisor at one point. You got kind of pushed into this CEO role, and now sitting here today reflecting, like, what do you feel is like the most salient piece of advice you've either received or that you have to give other leaders such as ourselves, in kind of navigating this moment and in kind of getting to that next stage of where cannabis is going?
Whew. Yeah, is there lessons and is there you think sometimes, like I said, it feels like we've kind of fallen and gotten lucky in certain places, fall in the right spot. But I think, and I just was on a panel recently about frontier markets actually, and what it means to operate when you don't have a landscape ahead of you and you have to
Hmm.
build that. And I think, this is where investors differ big time is they want certainty. And I think something that I operate with in a big way is uncertainty and being able to, operate where we don't know what's going to happen next. And we're making decisions about things as they come to us. I didn't necessarily define the whole pathway here years ago and say, we're going to go do that. It was take one step at a time and keep building on that and watch the market move, watch how consumers are behaving, watch how regulators are taking stances and adapt to the environment, which is what I think most cannabis companies have had to do in many ways, right? Especially going back to the earlier years of the rec markets and things. So I think, embracing that uncertainty can be really important for companies to do. And figuring out how you again fit in the market today and survive while thinking about where you need to be in 5 and 10 years and having a vision for what things will look like when they become mature and the stigma doesn't exist anymore. Right. It's like and that's just taking the examples of other industries and trying to apply. But it's that nuance in between because there's been plenty of people that come in and say, well, this is how you do it over here, and this is how you're going to do it here. And they crash and burn hard.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
they don't allow it to be flexible at the moment. So I think that's a big thing that, I think has helped us and I think has helped other companies that have been successful is embracing that uncertainty. And
Well,
you
that's a great segue to our final segment, which is our last call. And Ale, I think that you have been really salient with what you just said as it relates to the nuance of uncertainty and forward thinking, which I think is really cool. But I'd like to ask you one last question, which is, what is your final message for our listeners? Call to action, closing thought, or any kind of advice?
Um, well, I mean, if you're interested in CBN, Floorworks is here. As I said, we want this to be a major ingredient, and we need companies to build products around that and use the data. And so, we really want to collaborate. Another one is we really believe in the science, and we're collaborating across many fronts right now. We're bringing institutions together with other institutions to create studies. We're supplying materials for studies. So these are the two big areas that we'd love to have people reach out and kind of operate within, which we hope will one lift up the cannabinoid market and bring more consumers, but also just the research is going to be important here. So yeah, I mean that's probably my simple message. As we'd love to collaborate, and we are, I believe, a very friendly and collaborative company. uh,
I
so.
love it. I love it. Ale Lindquist, CEO of Floorworks, thank you so much for spending the last hour with us. I'm going
Appreciate it.
to order some True CBN and actually run my own little study. I track all my metrics all the time. I have the Whoop band. So
I
I'm
can,
gonna,
like I said, we have that real world evidence platform, so I can give you the link for that, and you can promote it with the podcast. And anyone who wants can get a free box and participate in the 30-day real world evidence trial. So I guess that's
there
the
you
real
go.
call to
Everyone
action.
sign up to be lab rats.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Love the conversation.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Anna Ray, you going to do a sleep study with me?
Sure. I've never tried CBN without THC, so I think I need to try it as just CBN.
Yeah, I'm into it. What do you think, folks? Are you going to sign up? We're going to drop the link. We'll get it from LA. Let us know what you think. Let us know how it works. Thank you so much for spending the last hour with us. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a like, subscribe, review, do all the things. You know what to do. Thank you to our teams at Vertosa and Wolf Meyer, and of course, our producer, Eric Rossetti. As always, folks, stay curious, stay informed, and keep your spirits high. Until next time, that's the show.